guys hear me? Is it coming through?
You know, a story that's somewhat remarkable. In disbelief that any one person can do this.
It was about pursuing a boyhood dream.
And when you think about this, it's a story of inspiration.
You just have to have the bravery to try and the determination to get it done. A dream plus a plan becomes a goal. Be thankful in your success.
There's lots of people in the world with lots of talent, but hard work is the thing that makes a big difference in almost anything that you want to do.
Okay, so let's talk about Anthony McCarley. I want to sit down because he's got a lot to say.
Thank you very much. Why do you do it? Why?
Whenever you're doing something really big and hard to do, you're going to have failure along the way.
There's no way we stay close to you.
But if you decide the goal is still important and you have the growth mindset, then failure just becomes a data point to learn from.
And again, this is a pretty cool story that Anthony will share with us. And I'd like to welcome to the stage to tell us a little more about his life and his journey.
I would not make a good movie star.
You're a good swimmer.
So I'm going to start with, because marathon swimming is probably a sport you probably don't know a whole lot about. So I'm going to start with the rules. And the first rules are, you get no help from anybody. Nobody can touch you. You can't wear a wetsuit. You can't hang on to the boat. You can't do anything. You can't stop. And when you do a running marathon, you can stop and take a break and sit down. You can't do that. Even when you take a feed or you take water, you're treading water and you're consuming your calories that way, right? You're moving all the time. The distance is 10K at a minimum, but most marathon swims are much, much longer than that. The English Channel is 20.7 miles. So a marathon swim is 6.2 miles, but the ones that you hear more about are much, much longer. You have to enter and clear the water under your own power. Right? So this is me coming out of Catalina right now, swimming from Catalina Island to the California mainland. If somebody were to touch me right then, I would not have completed the swim. Because they can't touch you because it's considered a heat transfer. So you get absolutely no help, and the rules are pretty strict. I've done a bunch of swims. The biggest three are what's called the Triple Crown of marathon swimming. And that's around Manhattan, that's the Catalina to the mainland, or the other way, from the mainland to the Catalina Island, and then the English Channel.
Okay, start time, folks, is 3:48 and 39 seconds. This guy is just going to make it in. He's not a young fella. Looks like he's got a beard. And we're about to see someone launch on a lifetime dream. Straightening up, and away they go.
So the question I get all the time is why do you do it? Why? And the reason why, for me, it wasn't about doing marathon swimming. It was something happened when I was a little boy. I don't know what it was, but I always wanted to swim the English Channel. I just always wanted to do it. I can't tell you why. But I'm going to tell you, most professional speakers, right, they wait until the end of their presentation to tell you the secret, right, so that you listen the whole time. I'm going to go ahead and tell you the secret to swimming the English Channel right now. And one is you have to be brave enough to go try something that's important to you, right? And then you have to have the determination to get it done. You have to stick to it. And that's not for the English Channel. That's for really anything that might be important in your life. And I found lots of people aren't brave enough to go do something that's really important to them because they're more afraid of the failure than the excitement of the success. Really, the secret is anybody could swim the English Channel, right? It's more about traits than it is about skills, right? The slowest person to ever do it took 28 hours. The woman spent 28 hours in the English Channel to finish that swim. Right? That's not a skill, that's a trait. So one day I wake up and I'm almost 50 years old. And I'm like, holy moly, I'm running out of time. And I'm a real believer that an idea, a concept, a dream, whatever you want to call it, stays in that state until you put a plan in place. And then once you put a plan to it, then it transfers from a dream to a goal, or from an idea or a concept to a goal. And my plan was awful, and you'll hear why in a second, but it was just a disastrous plan. It was built out of total ignorance, but my plan was I was gonna go swim a lot for a year. And then I was gonna go do the Chesapeake Bay swim, which is a swim across Chesapeake Bay down near Annapolis, which is a 4.4 mile swim. And then 13 days later, I was gonna do Key West, which is a 12.5 mile swim around Key West. And then I figured that would be enough to get me ready for the English Channel.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, it is 4:46, and the swim is on.
Chesapeake was fine. It was 4.4 miles, 600 swimmers in the water, so it was more boxing than it was swimming because I don't think I did more than 3 strokes without getting hit or hitting somebody else the whole time. It was just crazy. But it was fine. It was no big deal. 13 days later, I was down in Florida to do Key West, and it was a complete and total disaster. The first 8 miles of that swim, I was just booking. I did the first 8 miles in 3 hours. So I had 4.5 miles left, and I just boinked. I just hit the wall. I just collapsed. But the physical pain wasn't the issue. The real pain was inside. It was an emotional issue. Because if I couldn't do 12.5 miles in relatively warm water, right, how in the world was I ever going to figure out how to deal with the cold water of the English Channel for 20.7 miles? And I was just lost. Now I kept training, I kept swimming, but I didn't have a plan anymore. My plan had been blown up. And then very, very sadly, I figured out what happened to me. One of the fastest open water American swimmer was from Germantown Academy, right here, a local guy. One of the fastest open water swimmers in the world, a guy named Fran Crippen, was in a race that October. My swim was in June, this race was in October, out in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi. And he died because the water was too hot and he overheated. So when that happened, I was like, holy moly, I'm a moron. This is how dumb I was, right? What happened here? Right? So I started researching, and I was so focused on the English Channel and not wearing a wetsuit, all I could think about was the threat of cold. And I was so dumb, I didn't think about the threat of heat. And so what happened back in Key West, the air was 90 degrees, the water was 90 degrees, and the humidity was 90%. And guess what? I had a lousy hydration plan, I wasn't taking enough fluids, all that kind of stuff. It was just a mess. So I figured out, this is when I figured out how close I was to death. In that bathtub, when I was laying there, all the pain was my intestines shutting down. And I didn't know that until I read about this and I figured all this out, right? So, very sad way to learn, but because of that, my 2-year plan became a 3-year plan. And so what I decided to do is the next spring, I was gonna go do what's called the Tampa Bay 24-mile marathon swim, where you swim from the mouth of Tampa Bay up to the top. And it's a 24-mile swim. And that was a relatively warm water swim, not hot, but warm. And then there's Boston Light, which is an 8-mile swim up in Boston. And I figured, okay, that's cold water. So I'll test myself with the distance in Tampa, test myself in the cold in Boston, and then I'll go do the English Channel.
Doing good, man.
Then I also realized that I needed to be much more sophisticated in my planning. So I broke it into 3 components in my mind. And there's 3 components that you have to prepare for when you're doing a marathon swim. One is the distance, and we've talked a little bit about that. One is the temperature. Whatever the temperature is, you have to be ready for that. And the third is the conditions. And what do I mean about these things? Imagine walking off the shore and you're swimming to something that you can't see, okay? And that's what these swims are like, right? And so that's what this, so the training really, I still had to train for that distance, but instead of training for what normally people do for speed and that kind of stuff, I train for consistency. It's very important to swim consistent, not start off too fast and drop back and all that kind of stuff. I would train on empty, and we're going to talk about this later tonight, but I would not eat anything, especially on my Saturday morning swims. I would not eat or drink anything from 6 o'clock in the evening until I swim the next day, so that I would be training on empty. Because at the end of a marathon swim, your body's shutting down, it's not processing. I figured out how to do feeds better, how to do my equipment differently, all that kind of stuff, so that I could feed and hydrate better than I could in Key West. I figured out different equipment, because in the Key West thing, I had a water bottle that didn't really work, and that was part of the problem, is I couldn't drink water. So I figured out more sophisticated ways to get the stuff to me, and then it's dealing with the pain. The pain is just more than I can describe. The other thing is, if you go around the world or around the country, you'll find that there's pockets of successful marathon swimmers. But they're typically in places like San Francisco or La Jolla or even Tampa, because it gets the right temperature during the winter, because they have access to the right temperature water. I live in Pennsylvania. There's not a lot of cold water to swim in Pennsylvania, right? So my challenge was, how do I prepare for cold water? So that's a silly selfie, but that's a selfie of me shoveling snow in shorts and flip-flops and just getting used to the cold that way. The other thing I do is I fill up a tub with 60-degree water. And I don't do it as much as I used to, but during this period of time, I would get all the way in, I'd get my laptop out and just, I'd fill up the tub with 60-degree water and I'd get in. And I'd read a book, I'd get my laptop out, I'd get the newspaper out, and I would just sit in that water to get used to it. And that's how I got used to the 60-degree water. The other thing is, you have to be ready for the conditions, and the conditions mean a whole lot of things. This is not a Photoshopped photo. This is a real photo. When I jumped off the boat here, I could not tell where the water was, all right? You can see there's no horizon there. It's like pitch black. It's dark, right? So you're preparing for the conditions, right? And the conditions include it being dark. The conditions also include the sighting. And what I mean by that, when you're in a pool, you have the black line, you have the T on the wall, that kind of stuff. When you're doing like an Olympic swim, you have markers and buoys and all that kind of stuff to follow. When you're doing these kinds of swims, you don't have any of that. It's your job to parallel the boat, right? So you have to be, as you breathe, you're looking at the boat, and that's what you do. And so it's a different kind of skill set for that. You have to be ready for the chop, right, which is different than the swells and the waves, right? Your stroke has to be different. There's just a lot of adjustments that have to be made. And you have to be prepared for the critters as well. And there's lots of critters in every body of water. And they're just part of the game. And most people, tend to think about the sea lions and the dolphins and, the whales and all that pretty stuff. Some people get caught up in the sharks and think about the sharks and the fear of the sharks. And yes, they're out there. We've seen them on a swim and that kind of stuff. But the real bane to marathon swimmers are the jellyfish. They're so much, they hurt so much, it's a common thing, right? It's just brutal. I'm also a real believer that you have to do something every day. When you're learning, if you're really trying to achieve a goal, you have to do something every day. You need to keep it in the top of mind all the time. And so I believe in doing something every single day. And it doesn't have to be something physical every single day, but it has to be something that keeps it top of mind every single day. So I'm so old, I can't work out every single day. It's just not, I can't swim and I can't do that every single day because my body needs to recover. So I'll do some other things. I'll do calisthenics or weights and that kind of stuff. But the other thing is, back when I was doing this, there was nobody in this area that was doing these kinds of swims. There was no resource for me to tap, right? And so just doing research, right? Just doing any kind of learning thing to learn more about it, I count that as doing something that day is towards your goal. So every day, when there's so much to work on, there's something to do every single day. So you do all those things, you're ready for all those three components, and then the swim comes. And as I mentioned earlier, the way it works is these are solo swims. People have this image of like it being a triathlon or something like that where there's a bunch of people in the water. No, it's you and the boat, right? It's one-on-one. It's you and the boat, it's you and the channel, and that's it. And so you are paralleling the boat, and then on the boat, there's three sets of people. There's the captain and the crew, and those are the people that are running the boat. And the captain's in charge. He's approved by the Channel Swimming Association. He's in charge, all that kind of stuff. But they take care of the boat. Then there's the referees of the sport. In our sport, they're called observers. And they're to make sure that you're following the rules and you're not doing heat transfers, you're not touching the boat or the ladder or any of that kind of stuff. They're those people. And then the third set of people are the people who are giving you your feeds. They're giving you your water bottles. They're trying to give you information. They're there for you and they're to support you. And so I had 4 people in my support team. And one guy had seen me do the Boston Light swim and seen the Tampa Bay swim, but he wasn't a swimmer. He was a runner, actually, and a bicycler, but not a swimmer. Another guy was, and he was from San Francisco. Another buddy of mine was from Atlanta, had never seen me swim, and got him to come along. And then a high school friend of mine who actually lives in Madrid came along. I figured, okay, he's in Madrid, he's close, he can go. But he hadn't seen me swim since high school. But I didn't think that was enough, right? So I had met a guy over in the UK that was a local expert and was really touted his expertise and that kind of stuff. And I thought it'd be good to have him along. So I invited the local expert along on this swim as well. When I did the swim, there was a 19-year-old record held by Dr. Otto Fanning out of South Africa for the fastest person over the age of 50. Okay? And he had done the English Channel in 10 hours and 29 minutes. My goal, again, over the age of 50, there's right? So it's not the young people, but over the age of 50. And it was a record that had stood for 19 years. Well, my goal was just to achieve my boyhood dream. It wasn't to set any kind of record, but that's about the speed that I swim. So in my head, I was like, well, I've got a shot for that. So what I did was I figured out the math of where I should be crossing those zones in order to have a shot at the record. So my buddy from Atlanta, I said, look, when I get to the intercoastal zone off of UK, tell me how far I am. When I finish the shipping zone, right, towards the UK, tell me what time that is. When I get to the separation, tell me so on and so forth, right? There's 5 zones across the channel. So I figured out the times I needed to be in order to, have a shot at the record. I asked my friend from Atlanta, I said, look at these times, tell me when I get to those zones, and hold the sign up and tell me how I'm doing against those times, right? And the other thing, when you get over there, you don't know what day you're gonna go, right? Again, it's not like a triathlon where you say, okay, I'm doing it this Saturday, the Broad Street Run, right? It's coming up and all that. You get over there, and it depends on the weather. It depends on it depends on a lot of stuff. The weather is the big variable. And I know people that have gone over there and sat there for 2 weeks and never got their chance to go. So the day comes, and I get the call, and it says, we're leaving tomorrow morning at 4 o'clock. So be down in the shipyard at 3. And I'm like, that's wonderful, that's great news. That means I'm gonna start at night. I'm only gonna have a couple hours darkness before I hit daylight. So it's really gonna be a daylight swim getting that kind of start. And I'm excited, right? So, just like typical, stuff that anybody does who's gonna do an endurance thing. We go out to dinner, and it's an early dinner because the idea is to eat around 4 o'clock, get back, go to bed, because I have to get up around 1 so I can eat a little something to have a chance to digest before I go get on the boat and all that kind of stuff, right? So we go to dinner, all that kind of stuff. Just finishing up, and my phone rings. And it's the captain, and he says, Anthony, yeah? He says, I've got bad news. And I said, what's that? The boat broke. I have no idea when it's going to get fixed, but it's going to be days. And I'm like, great, because we knew a storm was coming in the next day, and it was just like, oh my gosh, I might be here for 2 weeks and not even I've been training for 3 years, I might not even get my shot. Right, so guess what I did, an American in an English pub, I sat around and drank beer for a little while, just kind of relax, right? And so we wake up, everybody gets up the next morning, we're all in a house that we'd rented, and we wake up and we're all kind of bummed out and all that kind of stuff. The phone rings at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's the captain. The captain says, Anthony, guess what? Good news, the boat's fixed. We're going today at 4 o'clock. All right? Be down in the shipyard at 3 so we can be pushing off, start the swim at 4 o'clock. All right? Well, that means it went from being mostly a daytime swim, where you'd start at night and finish during the day, all right? It was going to be mostly a nighttime swim. So that means I was going to finish, or I was going to start in the afternoon, and then it would be dark and finish in the dark. Right? So it's like, oh my gosh, that means it's going to be a nighttime swim. So anyway, so we scramble around, we get all ready, we get down there, we get on the boat, right? And I tell you, it is an amazing out-of-body experience when there's something that you wanted to do from the time you were a little kid to actually be at the start of it. And I got in the water, and it was almost like an out-of-body experience for the first hour. It was just really just crazy how weird it felt to actually be in the English Channel. And the realization I was actually there was amazing. And then at about an hour and a half, I actually ended up crying inside of my goggles because they put out an American flag on the back of the boat. And I'd never represented the country in anything before.
He's resting when he's doing this. He's resting when he needs it. Yeah.
Well, when it got dark at 8 o'clock, right, it was very hard to see. I bilateral breathe, which means you're breathing like this, right? You're breathing you're breathing 3 strokes, and you're looking and breathing 3 strokes, and you go this way. So I'm only seeing the boat every 6 strokes. It's pitch black, right? So guess what happens when it's pitch black and you're not looking at a line? I mean, you talk about black. I mean, let me paint this picture for you. You go camping, that's dark, right? It's not as dark as when you're in the middle of the channel. You can't see, the cliffs of Dover, there's no houses there, there's no lights there, it's black, right? You can't see France, it's black. You can't see, anything north, you can't see anything, it's black, it's everywhere, right? It's just black. So all you get is every 6 strokes, so think about it as like half a pool length. Every half a pool length, you get to look up and glance over and see a light of the boat. And you're supposed to align yourself to that and stay parallel with that. Well, I zigzag in a 25-yard pool. I mean, I just do. I've worked on it, I've trained for it, and I still just zigzag a little bit. So my zigzagging was very pronounced. Well, the guy from, the local expert guy, had everybody in the boat in a tizzy that I was going hypothermic. And I'd never swim with this guy or whatever because zigzagging is the first sign of hypothermia. So I keep swimming, I keep going, right? I don't even know what's going on in the boat, and I just keep going. Then I get to the end of the separation zone, right? So which is a little bit more than the halfway zone. And at that point, my friend from Atlanta holds up a sign, and I'm 10 minutes ahead of pace. And so I don't know if you guys have ever had a good day before, but this was like a good day. I am telling you, I felt like I was fresh as fresh could be. I felt like I'd just gotten in the water. So he was in there just getting all excited, all this kind of stuff. My friend from Madrid is actually a lifelong friend. I've known him forever. He knows my mom, he knows my wife, he knows all that. And he was just freaking out. He's an attorney, so he's just very much a take charge kind of guy. Right? Again, he hadn't seen me swim in 30 years, much less do anything like this. So he cared passionately about my well-being, right? And he's told me later, all he could think about all the time was, having to call my wife, having to call my mom and give him bad news. That's all he could think about the whole time because the guy from the UK got him worked up. In the meantime, right, I'm cranking. I am just smoking. I am having the swim of my life. And I felt so good. And so I don't know if people here are runners or bikers, but there's this thing called negative splitting. And negative splitting is where the second half of the event you do faster than the first half. So guess what's going on in my head? I'm feeling awesome. I'm gonna negative split the English Channel. That's what I'm thinking, right? I'm gonna negative split the English Channel. So I speed up. Guess what the second sign of hypothermia is? Speeding up. Because it means the swimmer's panicking and he needs to get out of the water. And I get to a spot half mile offshore, and it's a spot where a swimmer had died just 5 weeks previous. Not with this captain, but with another captain. And it had been the first death in the English Channel in a decade. It had been a long time. And so I hit the tides, and I hit a treadmill, and I was swimming, but my distance being covered dropped dramatically. Right? And so it's just like painful, not body painful, but it was just painful going and not getting anywhere. And it was just awful. And the captain comes over and he yells at me, "You zigzag one more time and you're done." Well, I'd been zigzagging all night long. I zigzagged. And the captain called the swim. It was the end of the swim. And so after swimming 12 and a half hours, swimming through the night, half an hour from the French coast, I got ordered out of the water. And I got out. And you cannot disobey a captain's order. Now the record was long past by that point, but I could still swim a half mile. Right? I could have done it. But when the captain gives an order, and if you don't follow it, you get a lifetime ban. And you never get to come back. So I got out. I got it, I touched the boat, and I could tell by the look on the captain's face, because he came down to try to pull me up and help me up, and I could pull myself up in the ladder, and he touched me here, and he could still feel there was strength in the arm, and he just had a look on his face like, uh-oh. Just uh-oh. That's how heartbreaking it was. So you have a choice when you're dealing with something that's really important to you about what to do in that situation. And the choice for me was to accept failure. And it took me a while. I'll tell you, I couldn't sleep for a month after that. It was just devastating. And then the other thing is you have to accept complete responsibility no matter what. I gotta say this about accepting failure, and that is whenever you're doing anything that you really wanna do, that's really worth doing, you're gonna have failure. You're gonna trip up somewhere. You're gonna have your Key West, you're gonna have your first English Channel attempt, you're gonna have something along the way, right? I don't know about you guys, but I've been a sales guy, I've been a salesperson. I did not win every single deal. Even on years when I did really, really well, I did not win every single deal. So you're gonna have those things happen. So you have to just accept that it's hard, right? Anything worth doing is gonna have setbacks in it, and to accept that failure. Right, and it would be really easy for me to blame the boat breaking, so it being a nighttime swim. It would have been really easy to blame my lifetime friend, right? Because he was the one that was panicking. What I found out later is that he was so vocal during the swim, even though I didn't hear it, the captain heard it. So he actually thought, the guy from Madrid, the captain actually thought was my coach. Well, I had no coach, right? Again, this guy hadn't seen me swim in 30 years since high school. And so, and my friend was saying, stop the swim, stop the swim, stop the swim. So the captain who's in charge of safety, who's dealing with a situation where the coach is saying, stop the swim. He's in a spot where somebody had died just 3 weeks previous. If I'm the captain, I'm stopping the swim too, right? I can't blame him, right? I can't get mad at my friend because he did it out of love and affection. He wasn't, trying to do anything with malintent. It was all about love and affection and not having to call my mom and my wife. But it was, those things were all my fault. If you think about every single thing, it was 100% my fault. It was my fault to the point to where when something good was happening, because of my lack of communication, everybody on the boat was allowed to think it was something bad happening, right? So when I hit the end of the separation zone, I was 10 minutes ahead, nobody on the boat understood why I was speeding up. That was my fault because I didn't communicate, because I didn't share information. I was prepared for those 3 components that we talked about, but I didn't manage the project all the way to the end. And you guys know when you do complex sales, there's lots of moving parts, there's lots of projects. I know all that too, and I didn't take my business experience and apply it to my hobby. I didn't do that. So on the next swim, I adjusted and I continued on, and I figured out that there's really 4 components you have to prepare for, and that's what we're talking about now, and that's really the project management. So the first thing I did is I went out and I interviewed every single person multiple times. The captain, each one of my crew, everybody, to try to figure out what happened on the boat. What I told you earlier about what happened on the boat is really a composite of what I got from everybody else. So that's the first thing. And then when you assess things, nothing can be off limits, right? You can't worry about hurting anybody's feelings. If this goal is really important, you've got to do things that you might not want to do, but you can't worry about hurting anybody's feelings. You have to be able to look at everything. You have to open up communications, as I said already, and it's not just one way, it's inviting ideas in, and that's what the next thing is. It's just, what would you have done differently now that you've been through that experience of watching somebody swim for 12 and a half hours? How would you do it differently? It was addition by, some cases it was addition by subtraction. I didn't invite back the local expert on the next swim. The other 3 friends I did. I had my sister and my niece come, and it was there. So I took it out of my friend Santi, the gentleman from Spain. I took it out of his hands. I said, if something happens to me, it's my sister Cassandra's job, so you don't have to worry about it, because he's a very passionate, caring guy, and he still would have put it on himself because he's he likes to be in charge. That's just his nature. So I changed the people around me. You have to set expectations for everybody in your life, right? So even though everything I went through in that first swim, and I still contend to this day I could have finished that swim, everything I went through was, I didn't set people's expectations for it. I lost 10 pounds in those 12 and a half hours, okay? You look like I showed you those pictures earlier. you look like crud when you're done, right? I hadn't set expectations for that at all for any of these people. They didn't know that I was going to look like that. And so you have to set expectations for your people in your life. If you're going to go through this, I'm going to suffer, I'm going to do this, and you have to explain what they're going to see. You have to have contingency plans. And I think that there's levels of contingency plans. The first contingency plan is a plan that you tell everybody. A 3-page of instructions, right? The guy from San Francisco, I said, he's in charge. He's the only one that talks to the captain, because everybody was worked up on the boat, right? Because everybody's talking to everybody. The first one, it was just nuts. So the guy from San Francisco, he was in charge. He was the only one that could talk to the captain. He was the only one that could talk to me in the water, blah, blah, blah. He decided everything. The equipment was a little bit different, the supplies, the checklist, communication expectation. The second time, I told everybody exactly what I was doing, right? Because part of the issue was in the first one is when I sped up, nobody knew why. And then there's other things that you do that you have contingency plan, there's levels of it. So the captain and I actually have become very good friends. And we became good friends through that interview process where I was gathering information about what happened from his perspective, all those kinds of things. And we had our own code phrase that he promised me, as long as I could remember that code phrase, no matter what happened on the boat, right, he was gonna let me keep swimming. He was not gonna stop the swim. So if my crew all freaked out, right, if that all happened again, that chaos, he was not gonna stop the swim as long as I could remember the code phrase. And I can't tell you the code phrase because it was a captain's, and it had the F-bomb in it, but it was a captain's code phrase, right? But as long as I could remember it. So that was between just the captain and I. And then I had a third contingency plan, which I kept to myself, and that was if I was in that same condition again, a half mile from shore, feeling as good as I felt, I was gonna risk taking a lifetime ban. I was gonna continue. I fortunately didn't come to that, and I swam on. And again, I cannot overemphasize communicate, communicate, communicate. It's both ways all the time, right? You guys probably have lots of really smart people in your life and all that, and you're all really smart people, or you probably wouldn't be in this room, but you don't know everything. The opposite of when you have failure and you have to adjust and you have to internalize and you have to accept the failure, when you do have success, you have to be really thankful to everybody, right? Because even though it's a solo swim and I put in countless amount of time swimming and training on my own by myself, right? There's no way I could have done it without my friends and family. There's no way I could have done it without my wife, you know, taking care of things at the house and do that kind of stuff. It's just a huge commitment. And it's not the commitment of just traveling and hanging out for 2 weeks for the tide to be right in Europe, right? It's all the training time, it's all the, you know, all that kind of stuff. So there's just lots of people in your life. When you hit your quota, when you hit your numbers, when you have your success, when you're doing all that kind of stuff, you have people around your lives, or in your lives, that helped you, right? It helped you a lot, and it, you know, and it may be a coworker, it may be a boss, but just really, when you have that success, sharing that success, it really belongs to everybody. So it took me 13 hours and 29 minutes, but I achieved a boyhood dream of swimming the English Channel without the record, but I got it. So again, just to recap, the secret is you can do it. You just have to have enough guts, all right? You have to have the bravery to try it. You can do it no matter what it is. If you have enough determination to get done, a dream plus a plan becomes a goal. If you just have an idea, it's going to stay in that state until you put a plan in place. Once you put a plan in place, then you can take some action and get some feedback. Do something every single day. Accept failure as part of the process. Accept responsibility for the failure, no matter whether it's really your fault or not. Accept it. You adjust and continue on, and then be thankful whenever you reach your success. And that's it. Thank you very much. So I'm open for questions if anybody has any.